The new book is called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear. Dr. Carl L. Hart. How are you, Mr. Hart?
Thank you for having me, Clay. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying this book. I'm enjoying this book. You're making me think differently. I have a background around a lot of drugs and addictions, if you will, with my family and friends. So I'm really thinking differently with this book. All right, I want to start here, Dr. Hart. I've been watching the kind of media, press around you, and there's been a lot of misinformation. And I've been watching a couple of interviews that you've done, and it's been a lot of misinformation. So I want to clear some things up from the start, so I don't get any crazy questions of folks calling in. So let's just start here. I want to just clear it up. Okay, starting here. One, you are not telling people to buy drugs off the street. You're saying the exact opposite. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And I couldn't say it any better. So I should have you be my PR person. So thank you.
Got you, got you. All right. Number two, you are not telling people to do drugs. You're not saying go out there and do drugs. You are saying for those who are doing drugs, it's because people are doing drugs, here's how to do it safely. Do I have that right?
That is correct. We have over 30 million Americans who are using drugs every month, illegal drugs every month. And I'm just trying to make sure that we keep those folks safe. That's what I'm trying to do.
Gotcha. All right. Third one, you're also arguing that the war on drugs, and this is, I feel like I thought most folks knew this, maybe they don't. The war on drugs was really about a war on poor people, on black people, on brown people. It wasn't about the drugs. Am I right about that?
That's exactly right. People think that drugs like heroin, cocaine, they think that those drugs are banned because of pharmacology. They're not banned because of pharmacology. They're banned because of racism and classism and those sorts of things. And this goes back to the early 1900s, and I try to lay this out in the book.
Yeah, and you lay it out beautifully as far as why cocaine becomes illegal, and y'all got to read the book, but just there's a lot of history in there, right? The intersections of race that they believe that these black men were like assaulting. It's always assaulting white women, assaulting white women on cocaine, so they had to make it illegal. So some really good information in there. All right, so I want to just clear those three things from the door, so folks understand. So what I've noticed, and I'd love for you to speak to this, is that I think for a lot of black communities we're very sensitive when it comes to this issue because we have seen drugs in our communities for a variety of reasons. I can recall my uncles talking about their friends coming back from Vietnam and they were quote unquote strung out. So I think for us, it's very sensitive because we've seen these things happen. So what do you say to people who are having a hard reaction to the book because they're thinking of their own personal lived experiences?
And I think that's important because my own personal experiences brought me to the study of drugs more than 30 years ago. I thought that drugs like heroin and crack cocaine was destroying the Black community from which I came. And so I thought I'd study neuroscience to try to figure out how to understand the brain well enough to change the way neurons interact with certain drugs. And in that way, I could solve the problem of drug addiction. And if I did that, then I thought I'd solve the problems that my community faced. But after 30 years or so of study, I realized that the problems that my loved ones were having, while they may have looked like drugs were the main source, drugs were not. Drugs were the sort of easy thing for us to see. And we placed all of our attention on ridding our communities of drugs. And what we did was we brought police in to rid our communities of our Black men primarily and Black women in some cases. And that's what happened. And so drugs certainly can have a negative effect. People don't know what they're doing. They get tainted substances. They can actually kill themselves. Those are facts. And I'm trying to show people how to keep loved ones safe who are maybe using drugs. And I'm trying to get them to attribute or disassociate drugs from the real problems that are going on with their loved ones. And so I can understand the need to want to blame drugs in this case. I have women or people, mothers mainly, coming to me. I think about this rapper ASAP Yams. His mom Tatiana Paulino, she came to me after he died from an apparent overdose. And what it turns out is that it looks like he died from having a combination of drugs, and he may not have known that certain combinations can be deadly. And so one of the things that she learned was that she hoped parents get the message of telling their kids, if they're going to use opioids, don't combine them with another sedative like alcohol, like benzodiazepine, like antihistamine, like promethazine. And so I certainly share their concern, but there's a way for us to be concerned and also be smart about be smart about our interventions.
Gotcha. So you break down policy in a really brilliant way in the book. I mean, you go through the history of drugs once again and how these policies have really hurt our community. So I want to ask you a couple of things that, again, I'm open minded. I want to see beyond my lens, right? Because Lord knows I've had a background of drugs in my family. Um, is your argument that if something like heroin was legal, that I don't know, Basquiat would still be here, or Janis Joplin would still be here? I think of I'm using famous folks as an example just so folks get
Yeah,
it. Is that
yeah.
your argument that we'd still have the brilliance of Basquiat if heroin was legal? Is that part of what you're saying?
That's part of it. If you will allow me to step back and think about, like, there are a number of people who say, I support decriminalization, but
Right.
not legal regulation. So if you don't mind, can I explain
Please
to people the difference
break it
between
down.
decriminalization is basically treating drugs like a traffic violation. You say that no one will be arrested for drugs, but drug sales are still illegal. You can't sell drugs. Whereas legalization, we think of alcohol and tobacco, that's legalization where people can purchase the substance and people can sell the substance. Now, in my last book, High Price, in 2013, I argued for decriminalization, where people would not be going to jail for using drugs. But it turns out with decriminalization, there are two problems that I saw. Decriminalization does not address the issue of drug contaminants. That is, people still purchase drugs illicitly, and those drugs still contain contaminants that are potentially harmful. People can die. There is no quality control. That's a concern that decriminalization doesn't deal with. Also, we can think about marijuana decriminalization in a place like Baltimore. I think Baltimore decriminalized marijuana, I believe, in 2014. But even till this day, or as late as 2018, Baltimore was still arresting Black people for marijuana because the police still have this discretion in terms of decriminalization. They can still mess with you. In New York, we decriminalized marijuana in 1977, but Black people are still being arrested for marijuana, even under decriminalization. And so with decriminalization, it doesn't address the issue of police discretion to mess with those people on the margin, nor does it address the issue of dealing with tainted drug. So therefore, I am for drug legal regulation. In that way, we will have quality control. That is, we can control the amount that is placed in a unit dose in a package. So we don't put enough in there that will kill someone. And we also get rid of all of the adulterants. We did this with alcohol when during alcohol prohibition in the 1920s to 1933. Tens of thousands of Americans were maimed and killed because of adulterants. When we reversed alcohol prohibition, that number went to almost zero. We think about other places that have liberalized drug policies like Portugal. They don't have these drug overdose deaths. We can think about Spain. They don't have these drug overdose deaths like we do in this country. So the drug legal regulation deals with the police issue as well as it deals with this issue of getting contaminated drugs. So that's why I have shifted my position from decriminalization to drug legal regulation.
And just as a point, I don't know Basquiat, but I know that Janis Joplin, who was an old rock singer in the '60s, the reason why she died of a heroin overdose is because it was a hot shot, and there were several people in LA, and hot shot means what you said, contaminated. That was the term at the time, was because of a hot shot. All right, so let me ask you this. The word heroin, a lot of folks have been triggered by that word. I've been triggered by that word. Uh, and and if I'm wrong here, correct me. I've gathered that what you're saying, because part of it is chasing liberty in the land of fear, that it is your own pursuit of happiness. It is your own liberty to be able to do drugs, right? To do drugs safely. I am somebody who has trauma around people in my family who have done drugs, and I've always felt like drugs isn't just you. And when I hear that piece of your argument, respectfully, it it almost reminds me when I hear people say, I should be able to buy an AR-15. I'm not going to shoot anybody with it. I'm a hunter. And I'm like, I don't need your ass to have an AR-15. I just don't understand, why a AR-15 has to be legal. So, and I get the policy point of it, but I got to tell you, Dr. Hart, I struggle because I feel like your knowledge and your background, you're more capable of dealing with drugs and drug use than the rest of us, right? So what's your response to that?
No, that is an excellent point. I mean, your struggle has been my struggle as well. I mean, particularly when I think about the gun issue. When we think about the AR-15, I think that's a great example. On the one hand, though, I want us to remember, though, that the AR-15 is designed to kill. Not that that's what everybody does with that, but
True.
it's designed to kill. Drugs, on the other hand, are not designed to kill, but we protect our right to own an AR-15. We do protect that right. That's one of the Bill of Rights. That's an amendment that we have. When I think of drugs and I think about people who are family members, people who are not using drugs, who are negatively impacted from someone else's drug use, as you raised nicely. Now, we do have laws, for example, if you can't take a drug and engage in some behavior that hurts someone else. That's part of the argument. If you are irresponsible, there is a penalty to pay, and there should be a penalty to pay. So I agree with that. My concern, though, is that I don't want people to restrict our rights because they can do so in this arbitrary manner. Now, we can certainly try to enhance the activity such that people are less likely to get in trouble. We can have, for example, certain restrictions placed on an individual before they can engage in that behavior, before they can purchase a drug. We can add all of those restrictions. I'm open to all those restrictions, but I am just worried that when we ban these substances, they function as another tool to subjugate the people for whom I care. And the sort of harm that's been done by that sort of approach far outweighs what has been done by drugs themselves. We think about the 2.3 million people who are in jail. We think about the other 7-something million who are under criminal justice control. We think about the fact that people are paranoid and anxious about the police because they're engaging in this activity. I don't know what kind of negative impact that would have on somebody's psychological functioning. And so I think that those harms that is done by our current policy far outweigh the potential harms of liberalizing our drug policy. Now, it's not perfect. There will always be harms associated with any activity in which we engage in, because life is not without harm. And so I'm sorry, I can't give a guarantee that there will be no harms, because that would be dishonest, and there are no guarantees.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You're well known. You have an excellent job as a tenured professor at Columbia. Um, a part of it, I hear what you're saying. I'm just trying to think. I just want to be honest with you that it feels like it's a lot easier to advocate for drug use when you're in a serious privileged bracket. So sometimes when I was reading parts of your book, I felt like this was a rich man's argument. Because I think about class, and I'm always, if folks listen to my show, I focus on class a lot. I focus on poor people a lot. And I have never, ever seen anything good come out of anybody I know who uses heroin, right? And now when you have money, you can do anything. I know folks who are on crystal meth and they have money, they can do anything. They can give up anything. But I got to always think about the most vulnerable because the majority of people in this country in our community are not in your position. So I get it from a policy standpoint, but I don't even think cigarettes should be legal. That's just me. But from a moral standpoint, isn't it a rich man's argument? How I mean, they can't go someplace and get the proper drugs, they're going to want it. And that's all that I've seen. Rich people's different. Even people who are like upper middle class, that's different. They can function. But when you're minimum wage, when you're poor, so it feels like a rich man's argument. What's your reaction to that?
Uh, Again, great question. So I struggle with that too. But so then the question becomes, okay, should we ban a drug like heroin for the poor, but make it available for people who are meet a certain class level, middle class, upper class? Do we want to have that sort of differential policy based on your social class? I don't think we want to do that, do we? So one of the things that I try to do is try and remind people that, for example, if we had a legalized market for something like heroin, people, that wouldn't be a need to shoot needles in your arm. So like people, one of the things I tried to explain in the book is that one reason that people inject drugs is because of the poor quality that we get on the street. So you put a drug in your vein, then that increases the likelihood that you won't lose any of the drug from it being broken down by taking it orally. If we think about people, whether they're poor or wealthy, and you think about them taking a drug like, I don't know, Oxycontin or codeine via the mouth, do we worry that they will be out of control? That doesn't happen at that level. And the same could be true with heroin. There is no need, there would be no need to have injecting heroin if you have quality control. And but the bigger issue is I just don't know how I can, with good conscience, advocate for a policy that differentiates poor people from people who are not poor. It seems like elitism to me to do something like that. I have no other choice but to try to trust people and to provide to them the best available education to help keep them safe as everyone else.
So you're saying, if I had this right, you're saying that in the long run, uh, it is worth it to legalize a drug like heroin or whatever the case may be, because it will, as far as communities being policed, communities being hunted, folks wrongfully going to jail, in the long run, it's more helpful to have it legal, even if it might hurt communities. Um, it might ravage communities just from a policy standpoint. That it makes more sense to have it legal. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
No. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that even if it ravages community. You and I, we're talking about heroin as an extreme example. We can
Okay.
decide, for example, we can decide that, okay, if we don't like that opioid, we can have another opioid be legally available. Or we can
Okay.
think about other drugs. But what my main point is that I just am uncomfortable with having differential policies for people based on their social class. It's like, okay, you're wealthy, you can have access to this drug, but you're poor, no, you can't have access to this drug. That's where I'm uncomfortable. But we can talk about which opioid do we want to make available to people. If people say, no, we don't want heroin available to the population, fine, let's have that discussion and talk about
Okay.
why that particular opioid, if we think that the risks outweigh the benefits, well, then that should be banned if we think that's the case.
Okay. All
I'm
right.
open to that sort of thing.
Got you. Got. See, this is good because a lot of people just thought that you were like the advocate for legalizing heroin today, and they, they didn't realize that. Well, I mean, if they read the book, they did, but they didn't realize that part of it is just a longer conversation. I will say this though. Again, this is kind of the putting the policy thing to the side. I think I've seen people do drugs, and they become a different person. That's not who they are. I've seen them lose everything. So is there really, and I know you don't like the term soft drugs and hard drugs, and I know you don't like that term, but for lack of a better word, is there really a safe way to to use cocaine, to use heroin, to use meth? Is it really, again, if you're rich, maybe, but is it really a safe way for the average person to use these drugs and for their to not be altered in a negative way? I've seen people. I'm sure you've seen it too. I mean, I don't want to be graphic here, but I've used to walk to school and I would see sex workers doing things because they had to have drugs. I mean, I've seen people lose it all. So is there really a safe way to do that for the average person?
Yeah, Clay, I think that again, one of the things in the book that I try to point out is that the vast majority of the effects produced by drugs are positive. What you're saying and what you've seen, that's real. But again, people oftentimes misattribute what they're seeing for a drug effect when in fact there are some other things going on. If maybe some people in the audience know Skid Row in LA or
LA,
some
yeah.
of these other places around the country, you can see some of the behaviors that you just described going on in those kind of places. And we oftentimes say, and those some of the people may actually be using the drugs that you named. Uh, but one of the main things that's happening in those kind of places, people have co-occurring psychiatric illnesses, people have all kinds of trauma, and they just happen to use a drug, and we blame the drug so we don't have to deal with the trauma. We don't have to deal with the psychiatric illness that this person may be experiencing. But the fact is, the drugs didn't cause, or certainly in the vast majority of these cases, people take drugs who are wealthier, as you say, and they don't have these kind of issues. And that tells us then that that's not the drug. That means that people who are having those problems, there are other things going on. And we understand, for example, I mean, everybody in this audience understands that racial discrimination in the United States is one of these things that is crazy making, and and the impact of something like that on people's functioning, including my own, is incredible. And now you add a drug to the mix, particularly if
Right.
you're already suspicious of people, and you add something like marijuana, for example, to the mix. Marijuana is really good in some cases, particularly for infrequent users. It's really good at increasing anxiety and paranoia, to the point in some cases you can look like it's paranoid schizophrenia. But that's in the context in which that drug is being used. In the American context with American racism and all of these things, it could be a bad thing for a Black person who is really experiencing racial discrimination that they can't explain, and people are telling them, no, it's not, that's in your head. That's certainly, we certainly can see some paranoia and some anxiety, but to blame marijuana for that, that would misattribute that effect. And so that's what I'm trying to help people do. I'm trying to help them to tease apart all of those kind of effects, because the banning of these substances just contributes to that kind of psychopathology, to that trauma. And because if we are able to educate them how to do these things more safely, and we let them know that you won't be arrested for this behavior, to decrease the paranoia and anxiety that are associated with some of these things. But I think it would be a mistake to blame the drug for some of those aberrant or pathological behaviors that we see.
But if you're already a vulnerable person, let's say, I used to be homeless once upon a time. If you're already a vulnerable person, and a lot, homelessness is huge in LA, for example, and it's skyrocketing all over the country. Um, it seems like maybe drug isn't 1000% to blame, but I would think that drugs is going to put you on a downward spiral. It's gonna ruin it all for you if you're already vulnerable. And most people in this country are born vulnerable. So I feel like drugs is to blame. It may not be step one, but it could be step 4 through 10.
Clay, you get no argument here, man. I'm with you when we
Okay.
talk about vulnerable people. I agree. Vulnerable people, as I point out in the first few pages of the book, this is not. This is a book for healthy grown-ups, and I do not. I discourage people who have psychiatric illnesses, trauma, those sorts of things from using drugs because I don't address that issue in the book. So I tell them up front. I agree with you. Vulnerable people, people who are having these issues, you got to work these issues out first because it certainly can exacerbate some of the problems that one has. I absolutely agree with you.
And I guess sometimes people don't know if they're vulnerable until they've lost everything. They just don't know. They have no idea that they're vulnerable until things are falling apart. And sometimes part of what I've seen, some of that is drugs that can make it fall apart.
Yeah, Clay, we have alcohol available, and then people take alcohol. Alcohol is a drug. It's one of the most sort of powerful drugs that we have. And like you said, some people don't know that they're vulnerable. But do we ban alcohol as a result of that?
I mean, I know folks may not agree, but I think alcohol and some harder drugs are different. I think it's different. I understand why. I know alcohol can be very poisonous for you. I understand that, but I think that you know I just think it's a lot different. I think it's a different kind of experience. And I know, and they say, and I was reading some stats in the book, but I was looking at the CDC. They said that the drug overdose is the leading non-medical cause of death in the United States, and it has been for years. So just a few more questions. I know you have to go, but I think some people feel like I just want to chop it up with you, and I'm learning as I'm talking to you that you are downplaying the problem and trauma of drugs. What's your reaction to that? That you're downplaying it? That it's not the drugs, it's
Yeah,
something else.
no, I'm not downplaying it. I mean, let's just stick with alcohol. Like you said, alcohol is different. So when we think about heroin versus alcohol, let's just use that as a comparison. If someone is taking alcohol for consecutive weeks every day, and then they abruptly discontinue their alcohol use, they might experience alcohol withdrawal. The same
Mhm.
is true with something like heroin. They abruptly discontinue after several weeks of heavy use. They can experience withdrawal. Of the two drugs, the person can only die from alcohol withdrawal, not from heroin withdrawal. And I point this out in the book. So when we say that alcohol is different, alcohol can be just as toxic, if not more toxic, than something like heroin. So the only point here is that these are chemicals, yes, and they do have risks. And I certainly talk about the risks in the book. But one of the things that I talk about is that in our society, there has been a disproportionate focus on the negative effects of these drugs, as if the only outcome is negative. Now, just imagine if you were interested in buying an automobile, you were interested in cars, and the only sort of thing you can find when you go online is information related to car crashes or how to fix a car crashes. That would be inappropriate. That's what we're doing with drugs. And I'm just trying to raise that as the issue here as our society. But please understand, I am careful to try to help people see how they can minimize any harmful effects associated with drugs. I give a basic lesson about routes of administration, oral administration versus intravenous versus smoked. I talk about how how the dose is so important, particularly for novice. I talk about the environment under which the drug is taken. That's critically important in order to minimize or decrease harmful effects, because the environment can enhance the negative effects of drugs. So I try to educate people how to stay safe. And Lord knows I am not minimizing drug effects. I don't want anyone to go out there and use drugs who don't have experience. They haven't read anything on the subject matter. I'm trying to add to the public education on this subject. That's one of the goals of the book.
Is there any? Do you believe there's any safe way to inject drugs with a needle? Is there? Do you believe there is a safe way to put a needle in your arm for heroin?
You mean outside of the medical environment? Because we do this in the
Right.
medical environment. You mean
Yeah.
outside of
Outside of
the
the medical
medical environment?
environment. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Another great question. The problem is that it becomes a risky endeavor, because people have dirty needles or unsanitized needle, and that increases the likelihood of contracting a blood-borne illness. HIV is one such illness. And so I worry about that sort of thing. I worry that people don't know the dose that they actually have. I worry that some people may not know how to hit a vein properly, and then you can get abscesses and all kinds of other infections. So I worry about those sorts of things, but there are people who have worked it out. They have clean needles and they know how to do this. But for the average citizens, the likelihood of them knowing how to do this is really low. And so in the book, I discourage particularly novice from using intravenously for the reasons that you're raising here. So it can be done, but I wouldn't recommend it, certainly for not novice, because it can be too risky.
So normally, if I go out on a date and the person tells me, "Oh, yo, I do drugs. You know, I do a little meth." I hear meth more than anything nowadays. I'm like, okay, it's a wrap. There ain't gonna be no date two with this. Are you saying that I shouldn't be as judgmental, that I'm looking at it the wrong way?
Certainly about the drug use. I mean, like you and I are sitting here talking, and by the way, I'm enjoying the conversation. If you told me that you taken a drug and something, and then that colors my view about you in this conversation, I can't hear what you have to say. And when in fact, this conversation has been illuminating, and then it's been enjoyable, all of these sorts of things. But if I would have prejudged you, and then I would have missed out on this conversation. I would not encourage anybody to prejudge someone based on what they put in their body. I would ask people that they judge people based on how they behave. What kind of people are they? Are they good people? Those are the main things. And so I try not to judge people, but I'm human. I certainly do it, but I try not to.
Well, listen, Dr. Carl Hart, I want to thank you. I've learned a lot with this book. I'm about halfway through. It's really powerful. It's interesting. I learned a lot about, I mean, I will even say about American history and Black history. There's a lot of stuff in there that we should know about. So I want to thank you for this conversation. And I want to say I've been disappointed by some of the media narrative. So I just wanted to have a heart to heart talk with you, because I never dealt drugs when I was a kid like you did. You talk about that being from Miami, Florida, but I'm from Philly, 80s and 90s. I think you can imagine. It's just that
Yeah.
simple. And I love that you pointed out, side note, that whole New Jack City thing, that was
Yeah.
BS. Like there were never
Yeah.
any millionaires in West Philadelphia. It's
Oh,
fast money. It comes and
yeah.
goes. This whole idea that there
Yeah.
might have been one or two, whatever, like the Rick Rosses, whatever, but there was folks weren't profiting that much in the hood with it. It was a Nino Brown there. I love the movie though, but just want to point that out
Yeah.
there. So you break all that down. Once again, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, Chasing Liberty in the Land of Fear by Dr. Carl L. Hart. Check it out, y'all. Dr. Hart, thank you for this conversation, brother. I appreciate it.
No, I really appreciate it, man. And just thank you. And thank you for taking the argument seriously. And thank you for the questions. Just thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, man. Thank you.